This was my 25th year attending Black Hat USA in Las Vegas. And I remember back to that first year when I was overwhelmed, which it's kind of funny in retrospect because there were only like 3 distinct tracks, and almost all of it was focused on network security. It wasn't until around 2003 that embedded hardware started getting its own talks, and then, a few years later, its own track. You can hear more about the early days of hardware hacking at Black Hat in episode 3, where I talk with Joe Grand, who more or less started the embedded security track at Black Hat. Needless to say, over the years, I've seen stuff. It's pretty hard to get me excited about some of the newer talks these days. To get to the really good stuff, I find you have to leave level 2 and level 3 of Black Hat and go downstairs to level 0. There, I find the talks in the Islander rooms to be a bit more edgy, cool, and often underappreciated. Like the talk I'm highlighting today. It's called Laser Beams and Light Streams, letting hackers go pew-pew, building affordable light-based hardware security tooling. I mean, come on. It's got to be good if it's got the words pew-pew in the title. How could I resist? But seriously, it was about building your own embedded security tools, about glitching devices for a fraction of the cost of what you might expect. Like having a $150,000 laser setup for less than $500. This is a story about how tools once thought to be only nation-state available are becoming inexpensive, and what that might mean for your IoT and OT threat models in the near future. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
I am Larry Trowell. I go by Patch. I am the Director of Hardware and Embedded Systems at NetSpy.
Hi, I am Sam Beaumont, also known as Panther. I am the Director of Transportation, Mobility, and Cyber-Physical Systems at NetSpy. And together, Larry and I head up the Hardware and Integrated Systems practice for NetSpy as their proactive security solutions group specific to hardware and embedded systems. NetSpy, a proactive security solutions group where we do any sort of testing from AI to mainframes to hardware to application security. If you need ASM, BAS, or security solutions developed specific for your teams, we are the people to go to.
Larry and Sam presented at Black Hat USA 2024 a talk that focused on inexpensive lasers that could be used for laser fault injections. This would cause glitches in systems, which could allow them to be exploited so that the data can be retrieved. For example, voltage glitching is a technique which tries to bypass or modify a normal operation of a device by injecting a glitch to its power supply. This allows one to, say, bypass authentication or inject new code. There are a variety of ways to go about this. What got Sam and Larry interested in lasers?
Lasers are cool.
Literally, he has been quoted saying this for a long time.
So, about last year, I started reading some of the research papers that were coming out, and they were talking about how little power you actually had to have to actually trigger a glitch in a chip. And surprisingly, it was much less than actual commercial systems are out in the market for, so we wanted to see if we could do something with that.
What Larry isn't covering is at the same time throughout our career, we have advised many clients who continually feel that fault injection techniques via things like lasers are infeasible. It's nation state only, the price bracket's too high.
Requires too many skills to use. There's just not people who know how to do this on the market. So
this perception that this type of work is so inaccessible is the reason why a lot of protections aren't built on certain systems, or at least so they say. So that in conjunction to us knowing what the levels of research that was already out there, we set out on a journey to actually develop something and kind of prove the industry wrong that you don't need a 6 to 7 figure budget to do this.
At one point, they even said that they could use a common laser pointer and come in somewhere around the $6 price point.
That's specifically for a very particular diode, but sub 500 is what I like to say.
The traditional way of hardware hacking is that you would take apart a chip and look at the underlying structure of it. There are passive ways to do this too, but a lot of embedded hacking I've seen are destructive, or at least semi-destructive, in that the resin has to be removed in order to study the underlying structure. You can burn this off with acid, or you could even grind it off. The same is true, though, if you're using lasers.
So if you'd like to use a laser the way that we are using it today, when we say it's semi-invasive, it means that the target that you're lasing needs to be prepared to receive it. And that's because most semiconductors come with an epoxy layer, like a package, right? And traditionally these look black and they've got markings on them. These packages, generally speaking, and I'm saying generally because there are far more expensive cost variants that make this fully non-invasive, but the epoxy can cause some troubles when it comes to most wavelengths of laser. So a semi-invasive technique is preparing the package of removing the epoxy, either chemically or Larry's favorite, brute force.
Some definitions first. Lasers are, of course, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Or, as they said in their presentation, bouncing photons inside a medium until they all march in lockstep. I kind of like that definition. So, why even use a laser for this? Well, for one thing, transistors have an inherent weakness to light. And light, it's easy to source. But how do you use it for testing? And that's where Sam and Larry had to get creative. And in the talk, they mentioned creating something they called rave light.
So this is what happens when you ask a bunch of hackers to come up with a name. So honestly speaking, we kind of liked the term. We came up with quite a few names, but rave stuck for a few reasons. The first being it has ray in it, hence ray of light. Rave with the V was kind of ironic to us for a couple of reasons. Raves are typically known to have lots of lasers in them, as well as the V stands for the fifth part because the last 4 units that we made may or may not have exploded. So together it made rave.
So Sam just alluded to exploding chips and so forth. I would put some disclaimers here as well. Before they presented, they cited the dangers of working with lasers. And I noticed that neither Sam nor Larry are blind, from what I can tell. So, laser research, it's done under particular circumstances. And it's not for everybody. And everyone really should take this seriously.
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of a devil's advocate here. It should be taken seriously, but that just means you must take wearing protection seriously. You can safely work with fire, but you need to have fire gloves, right? So you can safely work with lasers, but you must recognize that you need the proper protection. And it is possible to get the wrong kind of protection. So what we recommend to people wanting to work with lasers in their home is know what you're getting into first, do your research. I am broke. I can't pay your insurance bills.
Good disclaimer. So the tool Rave Light is part ray, as in light, and V for the 5th iteration. But there's that light part.
Another group of people attached light to it to mean 2 things. Light to reference light that you see, but also LITE is traditionally used in a lot of tooling to tell a user that what you're getting is not the $150,000 variant. You're getting the
cheap version.
The cheap version that still does the same thing.
And then there are other acronyms, such as LOREM.
It is an inside joke amongst Larry and I, just because when I produce any reports for anyone, I found during my career it was really hard to find the term to do or other things. So I was trying to find a tag that I could use to search anywhere that would never be used in the English language, and LOREM was the easiest tag.
And I fixed that, so now it's everywhere.
Yes. Now, what represented something unfinished, which I kind of feel like is a little bit of foreshadowing right now, it is now representing the team, and I think I'm going to have to bring up the slides to remember what it stands for, but yes, that's what originally LREM stood for.
One use for wave light is laser fault injection, or LFI. This is a technique that uses a brief blast of light to change the charges of the processor's transistors. So it could be flipping bits from 0 to 1. In the slides, I noticed that they were actually working in laboratory environments, that the semiconductor was in front of them. Is there any opportunity for distance here, given that we're talking about a laser?
You mean like firing kind of like the other DEF CON talk? Yeah, where he fires a laser through. So for laser fault injection, the likelihood of you doing a laser fault injection over distance is very low. Just because ICs are in the nanometer range, not in the meter range of for targeting. Laser optics do have a very specific range.
And the focal length of the actual objective we're using is only a few millimeters, so.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could, but you wouldn't want to, honestly. Yeah. But this, most fault injection work would have to be physically in your possession anyway. And that's what you would use it for.
So what type of devices would be of interest in this research? And how have they used fault injection in the past?
Mostly semiconductor. Anything that's semiconductor.
Any sort of like embedded controller, any sort of like embedded device, anything that has memory stored on it, anything that has a processor.
Yeah, if it thinks, processes any information or stores it, that's what we are interested in. Basically, the point of laser fault injection is to, the most common one is to cause a processor to skip a function, specifically as an example. Which changes the process's behavior. So to give you an example, a real way of what I've used fault injection for is there is an automotive controller that when it did a boot up, it went through a secure boot process where there was a specific area of memory that was responsible for checking if the boot up process was in secure mode or debug. Now, by applying fault injection techniques, I was able to skip over this specific security check, and the default behavior of that IC was to default to unsecure. So by applying fault injection techniques, I was able to unlock, my target and get it to give me its firmware as a result of just skipping an instruction.
That's a great example.
It's a real one, so I am imagining myself in Japan right now.
What Sam's referring to is Automotive World and the Tokyo Pwn to Own held in 2024.
Well, typically it's about trying to get the chip to do something it's not supposed to do. So enabling debug is certainly one of them. You can have it glitch over protections. You can make it just go into sections of memory that it's not supposed to, activate dead code. There's lots of things you can do with it.
So can you inject new code?
It depends. So if you target the section of the code where the memory is actually loading the instructions and you do it, you can change what the instruction is with limited amount of what actual bits you can change.
So you can change memory, but it's hyper inefficient and it's not usually used for that. So glitching can be used to change specific memory areas to unlock or relock behaviors. But when it comes to the issue of software or keys or anything like that, it's less simple to flip a bit, right, in the right space. It's more effective to use laser fault injection to cause certain behaviors to change than it is, for example, the secure boot that I mentioned, the behavior change which made it unsecure and therefore allowed people to extract the firmware, which previously wasn't. And then as a result of that, you could write and read firmware. It was fully unlocked.
And then there's one more definition and another use for lasers, and this is called iris.
Iris, yeah. Infrared in situ is what it stands for. That is Bunny, and I'm going to say his last name wrong, but Bunny Hyung. He's another researcher who's really well known in the semiconductor, hardware, and embedded space. And he released research back in 2023 to prove to everyone that you can actually see through silicon using specific wavelengths of light, hence iris. So we use iris to not only help us target our laser visually, but also use iris to be able to look within our target for future things like laser fault injection specific criteria, or maybe I don't think we were using it for LLSI.
We're not using it for LSSI, but we are using it to identify.
This is why he doesn't do acronyms. If you just called that, yeah.
But we're using that to also identify if the chip is what we expect it to be.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, iris allows us to do static imaging and targeting visually, manually.
Static imaging looks at the chip's architecture and activity in real time, bouncing a laser light off of it. The process captures the results, and they show off-color images of the semiconductors, which then are analyzed. So performing this, you get back a lot of data. One image, in particular, was not of a chip, but what appeared to be static on an old TV screen.
It's a pixel. It looks like the noisy screens on old televisions.
Yeah, it looks like the static screens, yeah.
So, Sam and Larry, they had to create some machine learning that can interpret this.
If you're looking for the right term, we built a CNN.
Yeah, I can't remember what C stands for.
A CNN, a convolutional neural net, which is machine learning. And that is a model that works off the optical...
Off the images that were extracted by the LSI.
Yeah.
And once it actually knows where the bits are, it can learn what the bits actually mean and be able to read out the chip for you based on the static images.
So the flow would be, you receive an LLSI image, train the model. So ideally, you receive the image of something that you know. You train the model on that data set that you know. And then you take that model, the CNN, back to a target of something that you haven't worked with before and see if it can read. You can read the LLSI images that are created as a result of that.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, then you have to fingerprint that new target so that it learns how to do it.
So if you're still struggling to understand this, think about oscilloscopes being one way to read chips, where the peak on the graph is going to tell me it's a 1 or a 0, and the valley is going to tell me it's a 1 or a 0.
Correct?
Yes.
Kind of, or at least binary data.
And this starts to get into something called laser logic state imaging, or LLSI. This is a technology that uses infrared emission microscopy, IREM, for silicon conductor process development and also product debug applications.
So often cases people have used LLSI to extract keys because that's a static area of memory. And it's generally it's considered a fairly secure area to do. So LLSI has been used to extract secure memory of secrets.
It's also been used to try to extract the firmware of different parts of the chip as it runs.
If you hate yourself, yeah, it's perfectly possible. Requires a lot of automation, but it is perfectly possible.
So if you think about it, what's actually happening is the transistors are acting sort of like little broadcast antennas, like going over the network, and the energy is changing how much light gets reflected. So it'll go up and down as the modulated signal is going up and down on the voltage line. And when the laser hits it, that laser is also going to become brighter and dimmer based on the electrical signal and that modulation. And so your laser can pick up the modulation that was sent, and anywhere you get a strong signal, that transistor is active.
It depends on how pedantic you want us to be. The laser, if received and the target being imaged by it, what you are receiving is a representation of that data, yes. The reason why we say representation is every target with every different memory cell is going to be built differently. So one noisy screen is going to be different from another noisy screen, which is what the model's for, is to understand, right? So for instance, if I give you a block of 8 ones and you program it into an IC, that does not mean in memory that the ones are next to each other. They can be all over that memory. So this applies to everything. This also means that memory that isn't a 1 is also there. And then you have random data.
It also means you're not just going to see 8 transistors on and off. They're in a cluster of gates, so there could be 16, there could be 32, there could be, depends on how the gates are activated and how the memory is stored and what sort of layout they have for the system.
The good news is that everything they presented at Black Hat is open source.
Everything that we're doing is going online, open source, open hardware. All of the customizations that we made, all of the code that we built, everything is going online. It's the GitHub link that's connected to our slides, but eventually it's going to go.
Everything will be on there.
Yes, github.com. I think it's /project/rem/rave, if I remember that correctly.
So, given all this, would it be a good entry point for someone who's interested in embedded security?
In the sense of Rave or in the sense of LFI in general? I think there are lots of resources online that you can use to understand the principles of LFI. But if you wanted an entry-level tool to help you do LFI, we think that Rave can help fit the bill.
Yeah.
Go for it.
There's a difference between having the theoretical knowledge and be able to get hands-on and try to play around with it and see what happens.
Yeah.
And this hopefully will let people enter that ability to do that much easier. Yeah, I always believe that building your own tools is the best way to learn how something works.
And you get to build your own tools along the way. One of the projects is to build your own custom laser mount.
I think the one limitation that we do brush over is it does kind of require or expect you to have a 3D printer or have access to a 3D printer. But given the cost of PLA is pretty low, many people have their own 3D printer, but if they don't, they can just send the design out or have the design printed for them. So it's still accessible. It's just the easy factor of getting it changes depending on where you live.
So beyond the technical stuff of building this, what is the end goal of this project?
For me personally, the end goal of this project was to, one, democratize hardware tooling. There's a lot of tooling today that gets gate-kept behind high price margins. And that doesn't just hurt individuals, it also hurts startups. Mm-hmm. So there are many people we've actually met who have indicated their struggles doing certain types of work with lasers as a result of that price margin. So our work is to try and prove that you don't need it, not all the time. Don't get me wrong, some of the higher price bracket items are well worth their price. But to bring it to their homes to allow people to start to learn is a really big thing for us. The second thing is honestly, there have been some engagements where this type of fault injection would have been very useful for us, but that was more of a side effect for us than it was, the main reason, which was getting hardware tooling more affordable.
If you get a chance to see this talk on YouTube when it's available, watch it. They started off their talk with a cute story about how this title was the best title that you could come up with at 2 a.m. on the evening when the Black Hat call for papers was due. I suspect most paper submissions don't happen in this way.
Okay, so the precursor to this was NetSpy as an organization have been very supportive of Larry and I. Hardware is not an easy thing to do. And it's even further not an easy thing for a company to support. It requires a lot of investment and a lot of trust from the company to believe that we are doing the right thing, right? And that's something that I came to NetSpy for. And this isn't a sales pitch, it actually is. So as a result of that support, one of the things they said was, hey, media and marketing is really important to make sure that the clever people in NetSpy are known to be who they are. So they were encouraging us to submit papers. And I remember at one point writing an alarm on my phone being like, CFP for Black Hat is at this time, knowing that I was traveling a lot. We did, over the course of a few weeks to a few months, we slowly pieced together an abstract. But on the eve of our EKO, our employee kickoff, which is a very large corporate event where we're all together, I received my own alarm telling me my CFP is due, and I haven't looked at it for a while. Larry just got back from his vacation. We cut the party short, not completely inebriated. And then when we pulled out the outline that we had made for Black Hat, we realized that... missing
one key element.
We realized that the title for the talk didn't exist. So... yeah, we had 3 pages of that scrolling screen on the thing is directly taken from our abstract.
Notes,
Yeah, because we had just 3 pages of trialing and erroring what worked. Because I don't want to create a title that isn't representative of, I've been someone who that talk title is really cool and you show up and it's not at all what it sounds like. So it was really important for us to come up with a title that represented what we were trying to do, but also, kept things interesting. And Larry came up with Pew Pew, and I couldn't let it go.
At least I contributed something.
Yeah, Larry contributed Pew Pew.
In truth, it was the Pew Pew that caught my curiosity when the NetSpy marketing team pitched this interview. I wonder, when it was first pitched to Black Hat, if the selection committee had a similar response. Well, it has Pew Pew in the title, so this must be a serious presentation.
We genuinely didn't think we were going to get accepted because of that title.
Yeah.
And when Black Hat did accept us, we asked, hey, we have title alternatives if you guys are looking for changes. And we got an email back saying, oh, you're published, like you're on the site.
One of the best parts is that we didn't think it was going to get accepted. So we're all in a meeting at the same point in time. And Sam checks her email, and Sam just stops.
I was on video. Yeah, we were all on video.
And Chad's like, okay, sam.exe has just experienced an error.
Yeah. Yep, I just popped open my email, and I see this message from Black Hat saying, you've got a message on the portal. So I log in, and they're like, oh, congratulations. Would you consider going to our coaching program? So to me, that doesn't mean a yes. It's like, okay, maybe we can coach you and take you on. So I was like, sure, of course, we'd be like willing to do this, blah, blah, blah. And then the next email was congratulations for your talk being accepted. And I was on a meeting. I was completely speechless.
And then I was broken as well.
Larry had a panic attack. Yeah.
And then how long of a window was that between the acceptance and when they gave the presentation? I mean, was there any fleshing out of the details, or did they already have those details available?
Do you want the truth or its cousin?
This is for the Error Code podcast. So think about how, in posterity, you'd like to be remembered.
When we originally submitted our talk, we fully intended to just cover laser fault injection. But as we were naturally exploring Generation 2 of Rave, having already effectively completed Generation 1, we realized that it would have been possible to do the techniques that we were doing for Rave Generation 1 LFI for other things also expensive, like LLSI and static imaging. So that's kind of what started us on that rabbit hole of, oh, what else can we do?
Yeah.
And so that is what ended up getting presented.
Yeah, it's sort of like going on Wikipedia and just start clicking links as you get interested in them, and you just don't stop. And eventually you have a workbench full of parts, and you don't know how they got there, but you got to put them all together in like one jungle. Yeah.
I'm on the weird part of the internet again. Yeah, so in hindsight, would we strive for so high? I actually really don't know. I think I would like at least an extra hour of sleep.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
It has been wonderful, though. The reason why we're harping on our 3 additional contributors, Chaz, Casey, and Curtis, is because the 3 of them were actually on the phone call when we got the acceptance. And they were not working on the project, and they offered their time to help us, knowing that we had a full-time job. And knowing that this was a big deal, they offered their time, and they were completely instrumental to several components.
We appreciate their help and their aid so much.
Yeah, like honestly, there were certain elements that never would have happened without them. So that's why I Black Hat only allowed 2 speakers on stage. I begged all of them to just come on stage anyway, but of course couldn't do that in Black Hat.
So given that Sam and Larry are new to presenting and new to talking to the media in general, what's one surprising result of having given this talk at Black Hat?
I think the only thing that it's still surprising me, which is why I'm bringing it up, is something we suspected when starting this is that we aren't the only people doing it. And having been the first person to just go out and open source it has started a colliding effect.
Or a snowball effect. Where others are beginning to open source as a result of ours open sourcing, because, as they quote, the cat is out of the bag, right? So they no longer need to sit on their units. And one particular researcher who reached out to us
was willing to share a lot of details, and we collaborated on releasing the tools together. Now, their rig is different to ours, but we're actually very interested in some of the techniques that they're using, because the power of open source is enabling us to innovate design much faster than usual. And we are seriously considering implementing both units together to see what we get.
And in fact, even just an hour ago, we had someone come up on the stage to talk to us who had been developing a similar thing using the OpenFlexure as well, and had solved some of the problems with the micro-positioning, and actually had a much smaller step area than we have.
Yeah. Open sourcing, a lot of people have pros and cons, but when it comes to innovating research in this way, it bypasses a lot of fear that people have. And it has been a very surprising ride that, we always suspected that people were working on this, but having now been the people who open sourced this and said, no, it's possible, and here's a thing to do it. Others coming out and saying, hey, we fixed this problem. Let's see if we can do that. Others saying, we also built our tool, also less than 500 euros. It's been wonderful.
It's also going to be nice to talk to all the clients who said this is a nation state problem. And oh, well, here are 3 open source projects that are not nation state, but apparently are.
I'd really like to thank Sam and Larry for coming on Errorcode and talking about their presentation at Black Hat USA 2024. It's fun to see that scrappy hacker spirit alive again, while at the same time it's scary to think that tools once only in the hands of well-funded adversaries can now be replicated on the cheap. This is inevitable, and sticking our heads in the sand and thinking that it will never happen is just wrong. We should be defending our IoT and OT devices, even against the unlikely attacks, because soon enough, they'll become likely. Hey, if you're enjoying Errorcode, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Join us on Discord. Search for Errorcode Podcast to join the server, or go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I have more conversations coming up. I'll have conversations about Secure by Design, and more about Operation Volt Typhoon. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.